let's start. Wow, you guys are going to get lots of airtime, which is going to be great for you, Fred, because you have a lot to share today, right?
Yes.
So welcome to my panelists for this last panel of the conference. We're going to be talking about accessible cities. Now, I'm an aviation person. Accessible cities is not necessarily my specialty, but this is why I'm going to be grilling our panelists. And maybe we can start with short introductions. Fred, you are the founder and CEO of Maahs Travel. Can you tell us more about your company and what you do?
Sure, thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here in Dubai. Thank you, Ghassan, and to the team for having us. So, Maahs Travels, it's a little bit of a misnomer where we're not specifically a travel company, but I spent over 30 years in the corporate world in the U.S., traveling the world as a wheelchair user and building my reputation and experience as an internationally recognized disability advocate. And while doing that, experiencing all types of definitions of accessibility, if you will. I left corporate world 3 years ago to establish my own consulting company in the disability space and devote my full time to improving the world for everyone, especially those with disabilities. So we focus on disability services, consulting. We work with governments, tourism boards, ministries of tourism, companies, businesses all around the world to educate them about the need and importance of accessible travel and the benefit of accessible tourism. And we also do a lot of other things. We help train companies and businesses about disability etiquette, working and employing and training people with disabilities, as well as accessibility audits. So we do quite a bit around the world and certainly love working with our friends here in Dubai.
Fantastic. It's great to have you, Fred. Welcome. Marta, you are kindly stepping in. We had on the program, I believe, Leonardo Barras, who is the counselor of Tuscany. But we are very lucky to have Marta joining us on his behalf. You're the promotion and BtoB executive of the Tuscany Tourism Board. Can you tell us more about the tourism board and your role?
So Tuscany is a central region of Italy, so the capital city is Florence, and we decided at the beginning of the year to enjoy a special program of a national minister to develop the accessibilities and the accessibility tourism. So as a tourism board, we are developing and mapping what is already aviable for the accessibilities and what is not aviable but has a potential and can be sold and proposed to the people with disabilities to enjoy Tuscany, to enjoy the tourism, and to be inclusive. So we are, as a region, we are really very inclusive, and we would like to extend this inclusivity to all the people from all over the world. And when you do a service, you don't do it only for the tourism, but also for the local citizens. So I think we can all gain about this project, and this is the first time we are so glad to present it because we approved the project last August, so only 3 months ago, and we are at the beginning, a sort of startup.
But that's great, actually. It's good to have the point of view of someone from a region that is starting and is acknowledging the difficulties, but also the objectives, the goals that you have. So it's going to be really good to hear from your experience and what you're learning. I think you also have a booth outside in the exhibition area.
Yes, we have a booth, and I met a lot of very interesting people in these days, and I had a very good ideas. I got very good ideas by speaking with people which are in this business from a long time, because it's not easy when you begin a new project. You have to hear a lot to understand what is useful and what is not useful, what you have to do and what you have to invest in. So, for example, there are many kind of disabilities, and also for the tourism is a challenge to offer good programs for all. So it's a very interesting place where to learn how and to propose and to have a sort of immediately feedback from people who are already working in this industry. So it's interesting.
And that's the beauty of a summit like this one, to be able to connect with everyone. So congratulations to Gassan and the organizers for getting us together. So this panel is about accessible cities. And when we think about cities and city tourism, some of the world's greatest tourism destinations are cities, right? They are a place I think people travel to because they're vibrant, they're exciting, they're diverse as well. And very often I think they are a concentration of a city's culture. They are reflecting also how, the values of a country. Very often they are a starting point for a journey in the country, because the airport is going to be situated in or close to a city. But accessible cities is not just tourism, right? It's also about residents, people who live in cities with a disability. Out of curiosity in this room, who lives in a city? Can you raise your hand? All right, not as many as I thought. How many of you travel to cities for tourism? Okay, not bad. Maybe we'll have turned people around by the end of the panel and everyone will want to visit a city. But that's my first question, I guess, is who benefits from greater accessibility in cities? Do we need to look at accessible tourism differently from city accessibility overall, right? Because if you make certain infrastructures like public transport accessible to tourists, obviously they're also accessible to residents and vice versa. Can a city accessibility be marketed more broadly to citizens of the country, for instance, or just residents? Should we look at city tourism, accessible tourism, as ad hoc or niche compared to general accessibility to the population? Do you have any views on that?
Well, first of all, I think, as you stated, accessibility, if it's built into the city, if it's part of the planning, if it's part of the execution of what the city does, benefits everyone. You're absolutely right. But the unfortunate part is that in many situations, accessibility is an afterthought. So you have many people who may live in this city, who are residents there, who may have some type of disability, but accessibility is either non-existent or just maybe minimal. So that limits those folks from experiencing the city, spending money in the city, accessing services in the city, all things that could benefit actually other businesses in the city. Again, for any city, it's great to be accessible because once you, let's say, proclaim yourself as an accessible city, it benefits everyone. So not only are you benefiting the residents, now you're bringing additional revenues and finding additional revenue streams that could benefit all businesses that become accessible. The taxes that are paid, I mean, it's this great cycle of benefiting all. So I'm hoping I'm answering your question, but I think too many times, accessibility is an afterthought. And I think, once we get to the point where accessibility is part of the initial planning, that's utopia. Where we're not having these conversations, we're not having these summits because accessibility just is. It's just part of our process. So hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, I think that has been a consistent message in the conference to build accessibility in as opposed to retrofitting things, which can be a challenge for older cities as well. Kind of have to retrofit, and we'll get there shortly. I want to talk about international benchmarks because when we think about accessible cities, what comes to mind is who are the top accessible cities. And if you do a quick internet search, actually, there's tons of different surveys on that. Only a week ago, the Valuable 500, which is a business collective of 500 CEOs, released its Accessible Cities report. Now, they surveyed 3,500 disabled people around the world. And the top 10 cities were announced, include Singapore, Las Vegas, Amsterdam, New York, Orlando, Paris, Shanghai, London, Sydney, and Tokyo. Now, we always wonder, first of all, Dubai is not there, which is quite surprising, but we always wonder what is behind the definition of accessible city and how did they assess it. I want to ask you, what is the value of these rankings? As a person with lived experience, for instance, do you think that these rankings matter? Does this competition matter? Yeah, what are your views?
So I don't know if rankings matter per se. From my personal experience, I'm always looking for and doing lots of research into places where I want to travel, how accessible they are. So I'm checking out the accessible hotels, the transportation, as well as the experiences, the entertainment, the beaches, the mountains, whatever it may be, checking into the accessibility of all of those things. So I don't know that rankings matter as much as what the city actually has to offer and how it benefits that individual. Because that survey was done across 3,500 people, I think it's valuable information to some. But when you look at those cities and maybe the way the survey was done, does it pertain across every disability? Does it pertain across every age? Because as we all know, every person with a disability, their needs are unique to that individual. So that's why I don't necessarily put so much emphasis on the ranking as I do what each offers that individual. A little surprising on some of the cities in that. I'm asked quite often, what do you think the top cities are for accessibility? And sometimes the very quick answer is, if you look at cities that have hosted Paralympic Games, more times than not, because that city, that country had to invest quite a bit of money into making that location accessible for the Paralympians, more times than not, they have kept most, if not all, of everything that they've built to become accessible for the games. That doesn't always happen, as we saw recently in the last Paralympic Games, and I don't need to mention the country, but a lot of things were taken down, which is a shame because not only did it benefit the Paralympians, but it benefited the local residents who didn't have the benefit of that accessibility. So just maybe a way to use the Paralympic Games as a barometer.
I think it's a good point, and perhaps we also need to look not just at the top cities, but also the most improved cities. I mean, taking the example of Marta, they're on a journey in Tuscany, and they have the willingness, and they're putting in place lots of different initiatives, which we're going to talk about. So it's not so much about, you know, the top cities that, you know, are also very visited, so maybe the respondents just happen to have been there. But also, yeah, who is improving the most? I think that would be quite motivating for a lot of cities as well. Now, when we talk about visiting cities and accessible tourism, it's been mentioned many times in this conference that preparation is crucial. And having access to reliable, accurate information before you travel. I think Trini was talking about 30% of persons with disabilities see pre-travel information as the main barrier, discouraging them from traveling. So what are the pain points in cities, in your opinion, and how do we make that information seamless and consistent as well? Because visiting a city is not just about accessing the main monument. It's about the hotel, the restaurants, the public transport, the airport. How is that information made more easily accessible?
Sure. So I think let's, as it was mentioned a number of times today, let's start with a website that's, you know, that has to be accessible. And the information has to be accurate and delivered by people with disabilities, people who have experienced it. All critical. So many companies now are working on excuse me, providing that information. So, thank you, sir. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks very much. Lots of companies that are working on providing that information that I think are doing a really good job and could potentially help what you're doing, Marta. You know, I think if we work together on it and complement one another and collaborate on building out that information, it just all becomes that more relevant.
From our side, what we can do as Tourism Board, I don't speak only about Tuscany, but the Tourism Board as well, is just to have dedicated page on the website, for example, or making good information through the associations, for example, so, or having I can say the promotion or advertising, but through the specific channels. So website, association, let people aware what they can do and what is not possible to do. So, and be very detailed in the information we give. So if we are going to show an itinerary, the itinerary should be really very detailed. So about, to let people also be independent to do the itinerary by themselves. So they shouldn't need the help of anybody. They should be independent and enjoy the itinerary as well in all the period of the year and by themselves or with the company as they prefer. So, but many information should be in, I think, the normal communication system, but available, but specific information.
Right.
Totally agree. And I think the sectors within a city, the businesses within a city should be speaking to one another too. So the restaurant association talking to the hotel association, talking to the transportation, because in that moment, you know, if I'm taking a taxi from my hotel to the restaurant, and then I'm going to some type of entertainment later that night, you want that seamless transition from one to the other. So you want your experience to be accessible all the way through. So if the different businesses, the different sectors were speaking with one another and working together to make the information accurate, reliable, up to date, that's a really critical one. Sometimes too many businesses will put their information, we've put it out there, yeah, but it's 7 years old and it doesn't mean anything anymore. Things change. So as businesses work more closely together, because they're benefiting one another in some way, I think it just helps everyone.
I think another way to inform people is also through the tour operators, so the specialized company which are working on this business, and to give them the support to find the right information. So to support the trade in some way, and to discover what they need to know, because sometimes informations are hidden, and it's not easy, especially for people that are not living in the country, to find them. So what we can do as a tourism board is to support also the trade, because the trade is a very good channel of information for the final customers.
Yeah, I like that. In addition to the tour operators, as you said, do you find that platforms such as Google Maps are helping as well? It seems like they're trying as well to indicate the accessibility of sites. Is that useful? Is that accurate?
It is. In fact, I think Google has done a fantastic job with their technology, updating their technology, providing information for people who use wheelchairs, people who are blind, the way that their technology continues to evolve, as other mapping applications are. I'm just blown away by the technology, not only that's out there, but that is in the works, that people are working on, that are helping to drive accessibility and inclusivity more and more. I work very closely with a number of Israeli tech startups that specialize in applications and technology for people with disabilities. And these folks are doing some amazing things that, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we would have never thought was possible. And even some of the things that I've seen here over the past couple of days in the trade show, absolutely amazing. So technology is absolutely key to not only accessibility, but driving business in any destination. And the more accurate that information is, the better it is for all of us.
So yeah, it was remarked to me at lunchtime that someone mentioned that how different it is for persons with disabilities now to be able to travel and interact in this generation compared to one generation ago. And we're hopeful that even one generation from now, thanks to technology and I think the momentum for inclusion, it will be just a upwards journey, right? So hopefully we're all optimistic here. So we've talked about preparation and definitely the role that websites and online information can help. Let's talk though about a key point, physical infrastructure and the design of places. particularly for people with mobility impairments. Marta, Tuscany is a old part of the world, lots of history, quite a beautiful place, but filled with different levels and old stones. I would imagine. I've never been actually, but it's my vision of Tuscany. What are the challenges and the limitations then for the older sites? And we talked about Vegas and Orlando being top accessible cities, but to some extent it's a different level of difficulty. It's a little bit easier perhaps to be an accessible city compared to Florence. Can you share your experience?
So I speak about Tuscany, but I could speak about Italy. So we have a very difficult situation about infrastructures because in Tuscany we have more than 10 UNESCO heritage cities and places. So they are untouchable. It's not easy to build anything or to add anything, so you have to request many licenses to do it and to present the project. The projects sometimes are not they are not approved, so it's a very long time. It's easier for cities which are modern, which can rebuild, or they can destroy and build new buildings. So we are doing our best. We have also a law, but it's which gives us many information how to do things and how to make accessible the buildings, and especially for the commercial buildings. So I mean the mall or the arts and culture, so museums, cinemas, theaters, but also for the hotels and restaurants. There are very strictly law to the owners have to respect to make them accessible. So sometimes it's possible, sometimes you can easily imagine that the Leaning Tower of Pisa couldn't be accessible for all, and it's impossible to build a lift to take people up. But many buildings are becoming accessible with innovative technologies and innovative also design solutions, because when you have an art heritage so important and so ancient, and you have to build something, it should be designed. So we have to put together design with technical solution for the accessibilities, and it's not ever easy, but we are trying to do our best, and slowly, but we are obtaining our how can I say, our first results. So our cities are always a step more accessible.
Yeah, it's
So
improvement
is going on, and also I think the mentality of people is going to be more open, because more people are traveling or are moving. So also the local people, the people who were in a house and didn't move because they didn't have anything to do outside, now they can go to the cinema, they can go to the theater, so, and they have their own life, and this takes to go on with this planning and strategies. So,
Fred, did you want to add something?
I did. So Marta and I had a very nice conversation yesterday where, of course, I told her, our company would love to work with you on accessibility, but I also mentioned, and I hope they're here now, that some very good friends of mine from Access Israel have done a tremendous job with creating and establishing accessibility throughout Israel and all of their UNESCO World Heritage sites. I was amazed at the level of accessibility in places that you would never imagine could be accessible, not just for a wheelchair, but for people who are blind, people who are deaf, people who are on the autism spectrum, etc. So, as I said yesterday, I'm quite sure, and if they're still here, I'll introduce you, that they would be a resource for you.
Yeah, you made me think, actually, when you were speaking about UNESCO, about what their position might be on accessibility of their sites, because they're famous for not allowing any any additions to what they certify as UNESCO sites, right? So I don't know if anyone has that answer in the room, but curious to know how they balance the need for inclusion with their wish, understandably, to preserve and certify sites as heritage sites, right? Very.
So, I mean, these places were built, essentially for everyone to experience, and of course, because of their historical nature, they don't want the integrity of that to be disrupted in any way. But lots of very clever architects and others who are able to find ways to maintain the integrity of that site while also making it accessible for people with different types of disabilities.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And maybe it's advice for Gassan to invite UNESCO next time to get their perspective as well.
Yes.
So that's about the built environment, and obviously a big necessity in having accessible cities. But the other side of the story is obviously making sure that cities and sites are accessible to people with invisible disabilities. Do you perceive that there's maybe too much emphasis on physical impairments and wheelchairs when cities declare that they're accessible? Are they only talking about physically accessible?
Yes. The answer is yes. If you think about a couple of things. So what is the international sign for disability?
It's a wheelchair, right?
It's a wheelchair, right? But 80% of disabilities are unseen. They're invisible. So maybe we should start to rethink what that international symbol for disability is, so that the symbol itself becomes more inclusive. So many times the businesses that I'm working with, when I'm contacting, when I'm interviewing them and what type of work they're looking for, and I ask about the level of accessibility, if at all, that they have, the very first thing that they start to talk about is a ramp or a wide door. And I'm like, but what about, and I'll go down the list of all the other things that should be in place for that business, that place, to be inclusive for all people. Not just a ramp, not just a wide door. As we all know, it's so much more. So you're right. There is, and I think it's a victim of our own doing, right? That there was so much emphasis put on the physical and usually mobility type of disability, when, again, 80% of disabilities are not seen at all. So, in my opinion, and I don't want to offend anyone who uses a wheelchair or has a mobility impairment, but if we want to be more inclusive, let's think about redesigning the International Sign for Disability so we are more inclusive, so people think more broadly and don't necessarily focus on the wheelchair or the ramp.
I really like that comment, and actually there is an alternative to the wheelchair symbol, and it's the Vitruvian Man. Have people heard about that logo for accessibility? It's the Leonardo da Vinci person with the sort of hands up. If you look at the way IT companies like Google and Microsoft show that sites and apps are accessible, they're not going to use a wheelchair because that's not usually going to impact your online accessibility experience. So they were trying to find an alternative to the wheelchair symbol, and they started using the Vitruvian Man, which Heathrow, as it happens, is using as well as its accessibility symbol. And we found that out at ACI because we were in the same situation. I mean, wheelchair symbol is very known. That's the beauty of it, as, you know, accessibility symbol. But we do need to be more inclusive in having a symbol that reflects all disabilities. Perhaps the Vitruvian Man is the consensus that it is going to be a future symbol, but we'll have to make sure people know about it. Because if you get to an airport and you see the symbol and you think, that doesn't apply to me, it's also a shame. So I think it's a journey, but a great point. Do you want to add anything on non-visible disabilities? We also talked about that.
Yes, so in our project, we are mapping all the disabilities. So not only the mobility, but also deaf, blindness, and other disabilities can have. So, what is important is also, we notice a different awareness about the people who are providing the services. So there is a kindness and awareness about the needs of people with disabilities. Now, awareness, a new awareness, you know, a new kindness. So we are happy because we saw and we noticed that also the mood of people who are organizing the services has changed. So it's not welcoming people with disabilities. It's not like it was, so something not good, not easy, so something to work on it. But it's now is a sort of joy to welcome people with disabilities. So who choose to work in this has a good sensitive and about the problems and understand the problems. So in our research, we are also mapping the other disabilities, so not only the mobility. The mobility, I think, is the most visible disability because you have a wheelchair, so you are more visible than the others. So I think this is why we are all, we had this, how can I say, improvement about to care about the wheelchairs and not the other disabilities. I think that was one of the reasons, not only the numbers, so something psychological, so it's more visible. But the others are not less important. So we work on everything, and if you open, for example, our website, we have the disability sector, so the disabilities, the accessible page, as I show you today. Yes, we have a wheelchair symbol. As well in the other part of the world, but inside the first program you find is for the museums for blind and deaf. So, and not itinerary for wheelchairs. but we also have a lot of programs for both. For example, they are not in the cities, but you can in Tuscany do trekking. We have specialized guides for trekking for blind, for deaf, and for wheelchairs. In the Pilgrim's Path, for example, or doing all around the hills of Tuscany. So it's a soft trekking, it's not very hard, accessible for all, families, children, people with disabilities, and it's just to enjoy the nature and not the overcrowded cities, which are not accessible for anyone. Because when you find so many people in a city, it's not a comfortable situation.
For anyone, yeah. Which reminds me, you had some images to show us,
Yes,
right?
it
Is
would
it possible
be nice
to show the...
just to show you. I didn't prepare anything about the cities, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to show you what is possible in Tuscany. So these are some pilgrim, this is Via Francigena, a pilgrim path which connects Canterbury to Rome. And it's a middle-age time path. And it's very nice because it's cutting Tuscany, so it's going on the Tuscan territories, and these are some pictures. And then we have also the second picture, for example. So this is trekking for deaf and blind people with authorized guide. So we have licensed guides which are specialized in doing trekking with people with this kind of disabilities. And so this is another, and there are really very beautiful places where you can breathe pure air and having good food, local good food with the local producers. And at the end, I think the next one is, so in Tuscany we have something which is lovely for all, and we have the forest bathing. What's forest bathing? It's regenerate the mind and the body, because we walk and going into the forest. There are particular forests which has a molecular, which gives you happiness when you are going in, and we hug the trees. So it's lovely, really. If you are not happy, you are coming out very happy from these forests, and they are really very spiritual. And I think it's nice for all. And this is very inclusive, because all can have the benefits of our forest. So,
sensory experience.
yes. And the last one, the thermal bath. In Tuscany, we have 33 thermal bath. So the water is a healing water. So to take care of your health and some specific pathologies in a very natural way. So all the thermal bath have doctors inside. They also offer rehabilitation programs, dietary programs, and they are accessible for all. And for children, for adults, they have different programs, and it's another way to enjoy tourism, for example. So put together something like the benefits for the health together with the places to discover.
To interact and bond with people who are visiting. That's the beauty of tourism, in my opinion, is that it connects people from different cultures, and too often we still see attitudinal barriers. For example, staff addressing the handler, the carer, instead of the person themselves. I think there needs to be a learning curve there as well, which is a challenge because tourism sector, just like aviation sector, are facing strong manpower shortages. So very difficult to recruit people, which means you don't always recruit the very best. And then it's even a steeper learning curve to make sure everyone is aware that they stick around for long enough, that they build this inclusive culture. Anything you'd like to add, Fred and Marta, before we conclude?
Just, I wanted to share some exciting news, if I could take a moment. So, I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that for many years, having used a wheelchair since the age of 18, after a diving accident, I had the chance to travel all over the world and experience different levels of accessibility, what accessibility means in many different places. And as we all know, the tourism market for people with disabilities is huge. The opportunities are huge. And in the latest report from Purple Tuesday, the disposable income for people with disabilities and their family members and caregivers now equals 13 trillion, that's with a T, $13 trillion US. That's huge. That market is huge. But people with disabilities and their family members and caregivers are only spending about 43% of that. So 57% of 13 trillion is being left on the table because of the lack of accessibility, or the places that are accessible aren't really promoting it, which is a shame in itself. So about 5 years ago, I started to work on a project that's finally going to happen. And we've created a show that will be on TV, and it will be digital and streaming. We're going to debut it next year. The show is called Journeyable with host Fred Maahs. I will travel the world, and I'll have a co-host in each destination with some type of different disability. We're going to make it as diverse as possible. It will be a female, it'll be a male, it'll be different ethnicities, different races, different backgrounds, different disabilities. But we want to motivate people with disabilities to get out and travel. We want to experience the food, the culture, the people, you name it, in each destination. But we're also adding the element of accessibility into each of the episodes. So it'll be real, it'll be unscripted. It's not a tutorial, it's not a how-to. We're not going to point fingers at places that may not be doing as well with accessibility. But we are going to make it real, and we want to motivate those places to maybe do better. So we're partnering with ministries of tourism and tourism boards all around the world, destinations. So if anyone's interested to do that with us, let us know. We've spoken with about 22 countries so far that are interested. So we want to showcase and highlight the progress that's been made. And again, we want to motivate others to do better. So we're super excited. Also, I want to announce that we've signed on as executive producer a lady who's pretty famous. Her name is Bethany Hamilton. When she was a teenager, she was surfing in Hawaii, and a shark bit her and bit her arm off. There have been documentaries and movies made about her. So Bethany will be with me in our pilot episode. We're going to shoot in Hawaii. And we're going to be doing all kinds of great things and fun things. And again, we want to showcase different countries, different places around the world. We want to motivate people to get out and travel. And we want to motivate a greater level of accessibility and inclusivity around the world. So happy to announce that. So thanks.
That's honestly really amazing. I find it so exciting and such a great project. Actually makes me think, why hasn't this happened before, right? A TV series about accessible tourism destinations and the experience of people with disabilities traveling, and we're going to be able to see places all around the world. Are you going to feature Tuscany?
We would love to feature Tuscany, and you know, it's funny. So I have been to Italy and spent some time in Rome and Florence, and have to say, I'm Italian. Part of my heritage is Italian, and just love Italy and the people and its history. So want to get back and let's feature Tuscany.
I promise him I will invite him as soon as we finish to plan the itineraries.
Round of applause.
He proves the itineraries and then we invite you all. And if the itineraries are not good, it's his fault. Because he didn't prove the itineraries as well.
That's right. So look forward to it. Thank you.
Any last words, Marta, before we conclude?
So I think that tourism is a sort of dream. So I would be happy if this dream could be accessible to all, that's all. So I think it's knowing new cultures, new places, arts. So it's something that is going to enrich everybody. So
These are
we
wonderful
work on it.
Wonderful
That's
last
all.
words. Yeah, I have nothing to add. This is a great
So,
end to this panel.
We work on it.
Can I have a round of applause for our wonderful panelists?
And to you.
And thank you.